Let's get more on the budget, though, now with Chris Richardson from Deloitte Access Economics. And Chris, you've released your regular budget monitor. In simple terms, we're basically heading towards the two largest deficits in the nation's history in the face of this crisis.
Yeah, look, really big dollars, over $130 billion in deficit in this year and in the coming year. Having said that, in many ways, this is good news. We went into this with a healthy budget, and one of the reasons you want a healthy budget is that it can fight hard in a downturn. That's exactly what you're seeing now. Those big deficits this year and next, if you didn't have them, you would be taking money out of the pockets of families and businesses at a time when they needed it most.
And so the point is the structural changes aren't long-term.
That's exactly right. Two things are hurting the budget right now. One is all that spending, JobKeeper and the like. But those announcements have been very carefully temporary. They will pass. And the other thing is that the pain in the economy is hurting the budget. The combination of those two things tells you that when the economy is okay again, the budget will be okay again. Now, that's not going to be overnight. It's as I'm guessing we will hear from the Treasurer tomorrow, it will take time to repair the economy.
Because I guess some of the things, and you make this point in your analysis in the budget monitor by Deloitte Access Economics, and that is that things like company tax have a lag inherent in them, don't they?
Yeah, they do. There's a rain shadow impact. When businesses make losses, and a whole bunch of them are making losses right now, well, obviously they're not going to pay company tax on their profits if they didn't make profits. But when they make a loss, it's not as though the tax man writes a cheque to them. They simply wait until the business does make a profit and then offsets it. So some of the weakness in the budget today would be even worse if it weren't for the way that works. And that little rain shadow impact means that the negatives for not just company tax but superannuation taxes, for example, will last for several years.
You make reference to this argument about intergenerational costs to younger generations, but the point that you make is that without the interventions that have been made by Treasurer Frydenberg and the Prime Minister and the states, for that matter, that the cost would be far greater for the younger generations.
I think that's exactly right, Kieran. If we could replay this crisis again, we'd do some things differently, but we wouldn't actually do that much differently. Basically, Australia's done the right things around the virus and the right things around the economy. Spending the money now is not just providing a benefit now, for those family budgets and for businesses. There is an intergenerational benefit. The more we can hold unemployment from going up in the first place, and look at what's happening in the US, for example, that helps us on the employment front for a long time. Even with that, however, chances are unemployment today is over 10% and it will only go down slowly. That will be the challenge we face beyond the immediate crisis of the virus.
How does this crisis, how we face this one in terms of the relative strengths of the economy? I guess, the RBA, you say that the central bank doesn't have the ammunition that it did back in the GFC. What about China in terms of its role in all of this, in terms of our biggest trading partner? We're seeing this row over barley exports right now. That's not the sort of sign we want to see at a time when we're going to obviously rely on exports to China as part of this growth.
Look, you're exactly right. Having said that, we're talking about less than 1% of our sales to China. So it's incredibly important for barley farmers. It may or may not be deliberate pressure at a delicate moment, but that sort of nature where it's really bad, concentrated pain for a handful of people. It's not a particularly large negative for the Australian economy as a whole. If you're looking at the economies that will grow fastest over the next 12 months or so, you're basically looking to those nations that have beaten back the virus for the moment. As the Prime Minister notes, nobody's beaten the virus. Nobody's beaten it until there's a vaccine or effective treatment, but we are one of a handful of nations who've beaten it back. That means we can open up from a position of strength. But that's what China's been doing. That's what a range of our key trading partners are doing. It so happens that in a deep world recession, the fastest growing nations in the world will be a bunch of the ones that we trade the most with.
What do you want to see from the government in the recovery phase in terms of reform? I know that you don't like some of the noises we've heard in the debate around migration and reducing that. Give us a sense of where you do want the reform to be.
So that whole idea, governments, I think, will need to keep going hard. We won't be able to quite turn off the spending overnight as well as things are going. But yes, the reform side of it, governments going smart. There's a whole bunch of things that we should have done a long time ago, but the politics was never right. We now have, quite rightly, a Prime Minister and Premiers with excellent approval. And why wouldn't they? As a group, they have done brilliantly. And if you really want to drive unemployment down on the other side of this crisis, well, if you can make Australia grow faster, and that's the thing about reforms. Reforms to the Federation, be great to see National Cabinet play a game of swapsies as they figured out who really was in charge of education and health and made those lines much, much clearer. There are tax reforms at the state and federal level. There's cities reform. There's competition reform. There is, in a sense, emergency reform, as well as we've done through this crisis. We now realise that there are some things we could do better and faster when the next emergency hits.
But just finally, Chris, while you're right and the leaders have got the pass marks, we're better than that actually. They've done superbly, both state and federal, and we're world leading in that sense. But it's easier, isn't it, on the way in than it is to remove some of the supports here?
Oh, look, absolutely. The virus has been a sprint. The recovery will be a marathon. We will get increasingly grumpy with each other. It's hard to sustain that sense of crisis for a long period of time. Having said that, there has never been a better moment to achieve some long overdue reforms in Australia. Many of our leaders, having, as you note, done superbly, are also exhausted, but they can't stop yet and put up the mission accomplished sign.
Yeah, very good point. Crisis can't be wasted in that sense.